Lightning cracked across the sky the moment I opened my front door, and for a second, it felt like the universe was trying to warn me. Rain poured down in violent sheets over the small neighborhood in Flagstaff, Arizona, turning the streets into rivers of muddy water. And there they were, two girls, no older than 19 or 20, soaked from head to toe, shivering so hard their teeth clattered. One held a small backpack against her chest like a shield. The other clutched a worn-out guitar case with fingers turning blue from cold. Their eyes were wide, startled, vulnerable. And it was the older one who whispered the words that would change everything. We were only going to stay one night. I stared at them, two strangers on my porch, my heart pounding with confusion, worry, and something else I hadn't felt in years. Compassion that rose so naturally it scared me. Their voices trembled, their bodies trembled, but what struck me most was the quiet desperation in their faces. I swallowed, stepped aside, and said the only thing that felt right, even though I didn't understand why my heart pushed those words out. Both of you. At once. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and helping people when they need it most, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps more than you know. They hesitated for just a heartbeat, exchanging a silent question between them, before the one with the guitar nodded and gently guided the other inside. My living room filled with the sound of dripping clothes and shaky breaths as they stepped onto the wooden floor. Their eyes darted around the room like they were afraid they'd somehow break it by just existing. I ran to grab towels and an old blanket from my hall closet, my mind racing with questions. Who were they? What were they running from? Why my house, of all places? The taller one introduced herself as Hannah, a soft-spoken girl with auburn hair that curled wildly now that it was wet. The younger one was Sophie, tiny, with deep brown eyes that looked like they'd seen far too much pain for her age. Hannah explained that they were sisters traveling across states, trying to find work, trying to survive, trying to live in a world that had given them every reason to stop believing things ever got better. And all they needed, just for one night, was someplace warm, someplace safe. I didn't tell them then, but those words hit me harder than they could ever know. Because not long ago, I had been the one stranded in a storm of my own life. I had lost my job, gone through a crushing breakup, and watched my relationship with my parents fall apart. I knew hopelessness. I knew what it felt like to need someone, anyone, to show a little mercy. Maybe that was why I didn't hesitate. Maybe kindness shows up strongest in people who have learned how cold the world can be. As the night settled into a softer rain outside, I made them a simple dinner, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Nothing fancy, but the way they devoured the food with quiet gratitude made me wish I could have done more. When they finished, they looked at me with a mix of exhaustion and fragile relief. I pointed them toward the guest room at the end of the hall, telling them to get some rest. They didn't ask twice. I stayed awake for hours after they went to bed. Something about the entire night felt like a moment suspended in time. A test of who I was or who I was becoming. My house, once painfully quiet, now held two strangers who carried storms inside them. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. But I also knew one night wasn't going to fix whatever had broken them. The next morning, sunlight broke through the blinds, bright and gentle. I woke to the sound of soft humming. When I stepped into the hallway, I found Hannah sitting on the living room floor, gently strumming her guitar. The melody was haunting, slow, and filled with something raw and human. Sophie sat beside her, sipping hot tea, her eyes half closed, listening as if the music was stitching something back together inside her. I didn't interrupt. I didn't breathe too loudly. I just stood there, letting the scene wash over me. When Hannah noticed me, she gave a shy smile. They didn't say they wanted to leave. They didn't say anything at all, which told me everything. Over breakfast, they finally opened up more. They told me about their life in Colorado, where they had lived with an aunt who barely tolerated them. Their mother had passed when they were little. Their father had disappeared years before that. They grew up bouncing between relatives, schools, and temporary shelters until one morning, their aunt told them she didn't want the responsibility anymore. They left with what little they had. No plan, no money, just each other. I felt my heart twist painfully at their honesty. They didn't dramatize it. They didn't complain. They just stated the facts like survival stories often are, quiet, plain, and heavy. For the first time, I saw how young they truly were. When they finished speaking, Sophie looked up at me with that same vulnerable expression she had worn the night before and said, "We'll be out by noon. We don't want to be trouble." A part of me wanted to let them go. After all, they were strangers, and I had my own life, my own problems, my own broken pieces still lying on the floor of my past. But another part of me, stronger, more human, refused to ignore what was right in front of me, so I made them an offer. One they clearly never expected. Over the next week, the house changed. The air felt warmer. The rooms felt lived in again. I found them helping with chores without being asked, cooking meals, laughing softly in the hallway, and filling my quiet mornings with gentle guitar chords. Hannah found a part-time job at a local diner. Sophie volunteered at a nearby animal shelter. I watched them rebuild piece by piece, like two flowers trying to bloom after a brutal winter. But healing is never as simple as it looks. One night, I woke to the sound of muffled sobs coming from the guest room, and when I gently knocked and opened the door, I found Sophie curled on the bed, shaking, overwhelmed by memories she couldn't outrun. Hannah sat beside her, trying desperately to calm her down but failing, exhaustion written on her face. For a moment, I stood frozen. Then I did the only thing that felt right. I sat beside them, and together we stayed until Sophie's tears slowed, until her breathing steadied, until the weight inside her loosened its grip. That night changed everything between us. It wasn't about being a stranger offering shelter anymore. It was about becoming someone they could lean on, someone who wouldn't vanish like everyone else had. And for the first time in years, I realized helping them was healing me too. I started to smile again. I started to believe in purpose again. I started to believe the universe didn't just bring people into your life randomly. Sometimes it was for a reason. But like all fragile things, the peace didn't last. One afternoon while I was at work, Hannah called me in panic. Their aunt had found out where they were. Someone had posted a picture online of Hannah performing at a small open mic night, and it spread more than expected. The aunt demanded they return immediately, threatening to call the authorities and report them as runaways, even though they were legally adults. She twisted the narrative, saying they had stolen from her, though all they took were their own belongings. Fear returned to their faces like a storm cloud swallowing the sun. For the rest of that evening, they couldn't eat, couldn't relax, couldn't breathe without anxiety rippling through them. But I had made them a promise the night I let them in, so I kept it. I contacted a community legal center, explained the situation, and helped them get the guidance they needed. It turned out their aunt had no authority over them, no legal grounds, no claim. She couldn't drag them back. She couldn't control them anymore. When the lawyer told them this over a video call, both girls broke down crying, not from sadness but from relief so intense it shook their bodies. For the first time in their lives, they were free, truly free. That night, after everything settled, they sat beside me on the living room floor, their faces still red from crying, their hands curled around mugs of warm cocoa. Sophie whispered, in a trembling voice, "We said we were only going to stay one night." And Hannah followed quietly, "But we don't want to leave yet, if that's okay." I looked at them, really looked, and felt something inside me soften in a way I hadn't felt in years. They weren't just guests anymore. They weren't burdens or responsibilities. They were family, or becoming it. And I replied, gently, sincerely, "Both of you can stay as long as you need." Their tears started again, but this time, they were the kind that heal. Months passed, and the house that once felt empty now felt alive. Hannah saved enough to start college courses online. Sophie grew confident and bright at the animal shelter, eventually landing a paid position. They laughed more. They slept better. They walked without flinching at every sound. They were rebuilding, and I had front row seats to the miracle. Months later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, we sat on the back porch watching the Arizona sunset. Sophie leaned her head on Hannah's shoulder, and Hannah played a soft, hopeful tune on her guitar. I watched them, two girls who had survived more than most adults ever would, and felt a deep, overwhelming gratitude that destiny had brought them to my doorstep. Some storms blow in to destroy, some storms blow in to bring people together, and some storms are blessings disguised as thunder. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps the channel more than you can imagine.